Alright, what's up guys? We are out here this morning in the light mist, beautiful gray day to talk about why pace matters when picking a running shoe. And so I have two great shoes here to illustrate the example. New Balance SC Elite V4, brand new release running shoe, and Nike Alphafly Next% 3. This guy's basically old news. It came out in January. Also a great shoe, but for two different use cases. Now I just finished my 14-mile run, by the way, in the Puma Deviate Nitro 2, which is a third shoe which I want to discuss in this video, but it's an awesome shoe. Now I understand why you guys love this thing so much. It's soft, it's bouncy. It reminds me a lot of what I used to love about the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3, but just a little bit better in almost every aspect than the Endorphin Speed, and not as harsh for some people as the Adidas Boston 12, which is my favorite plated training shoe, but I know it doesn't work for everybody. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this video is because there's been a lot of discussion recently around which shoes work for different paces, whether pace is important when picking a shoe, and whether certain shoes will work for you if you're running a 3:30, 4 hour, 4.5, 5 hour marathon. And there's a lot of different takes on this topic. I am trying to give you the set of information that can help you make an informed purchasing decision. It'll help you run your next race better. So with that, guys, in the words of Curtis Jackson, let me break it down for you nice and simple. So when I'm thinking about what's important when picking a running shoe, and that's any running shoe, not just an Alphafly or an SC Elite V4 or a race day shoe, there are three main factors. The first is my mechanics, or any runner's mechanics. How you run. Are you mostly hitting your heel, landing on your heel first and rolling through your stride? Do you run more up on the balls of your feet? That's gonna work your calves a little bit more. How are your mechanics? The third is body weight. Now this is a triggering topic, and I'm sorry that I have to bring this up, but it is important when thinking about picking a running shoe because your weight is going to influence how you compress the foam. And when I first started running, I was probably close to 190 pounds. I'm now down to 160 pounds. I've been fortunate to have never been obese. I've always been at a healthy weight, but that 190 pounds for me, that was probably at the upper end of what is a healthy weight for me. And then gradually through lifestyle changes, through exercise changes, I'm now at 160 pounds, so I can share my experience at a different weight and running different paces. And the third factor that's going to be hugely important when thinking about picking a running shoe is time on feet. And that's not just talking about the marathon or how fast you're running a marathon. It's thinking about, are you only running 3 miles per week on the treadmill? Are you running 100 miles per week and doing 15-mile runs frequently? Just this week, we're talking about the New Balance 880 V14, and I have not gone along with that shoe whatsoever, and it's probably because I'm using it the wrong way. It's not a shoe that's designed to be put through a 20-mile double run day test. It's a shoe that's designed for people who want to do 30 minutes on the treadmill. Now, I still think there are better options than that shoe for doing 30 minutes on the treadmill, but for that use case, it's gonna work a little bit better than how I've been trying to use it, which is 90, 100-minute runs, which it is not the right type of shoe for that type of work in my cycle of training right now. So with those three factors that go into picking a race shoe, mechanics, body weight, and time on feet, let's talk about mechanics first. So thinking about these two shoes here, these are optimized for two different sets of mechanics. These are designed for two different running styles. Let's look at the Alphafly first. The Alphafly up here in the forefoot has these Zoom Air units. This is the selling point of the shoe. This is why you get the Nike Alphafly 3. And so these Zoom Air units up in the forefoot, they're sitting under the carbon fiber plate, and the combination of this bouncy, softer race day foam with the plate and the air units right under the forefoot is gonna give you a nice pop. And so when Nike designs this shoe, they want you to be landing right on top of these air units and popping forward. And from version 2 of the shoe to version 3, they moved the air units back. Now, the reason they moved the air units back is to make the Alphafly a more accessible shoe, a shoe that can work for more people better, because they know most runners are not landing up in the tippy toes like Eliud Kipchoge, who the shoe was custom built for, does run. And so with Nike trying to make this a broader shoe, they want it to work for different people's mechanics. And I am primarily a heel striker. And if you've read Lydiard, now I'm trying to read all of the great running books, so if you have a running book recommendation, please let me know. But over the past year, I've read 2 Lydiard books. I've read Fitzinger, I've read Hansen, I've read Higdon, and I frequently reference Jack Daniels. Now, if you've read Lydiard, he explains that landing on your heel, landing slightly up right here on not at the back of your foot, but landing right here on the outside of your heel, then rolling forward. That is the natural way to run for endurance racing. Now, if we think about sprinting, if we think about schoolyard running on the playground, people are not going to be heel striking when they're doing that type of running. And there's also this school of thought that talks about how we were designed to run, born to run, minimalist shoes, barefoot running up on the forefoot. Yes, that is all correct, but we were also not designed to be running for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And so when we think about what the most natural way is to run for that period of time, what Lydiard says is it's landing gently on the heel and rolling through the stride, ending on the forefoot and popping off. And so when it comes to mechanics, a shoe like the New Balance SC Elite V4 is going to be much better for most runners who are landing on the back of the heel here and then rolling through in that natural endurance running style. The Nike Alpha Fly is going to be a lot better for runners who, the freak runners out there, the genetic freaks who can land on the forefoot for an entirety of a race. And when I say it's better for most runners, I do not mean that if you are a 4-hour marathoner who's heel striking, you can't use the Alpha Fly. You most certainly can. They have made this a more approachable shoe. But even if they didn't make it a more approachable shoe, you could use the shoe. You're not going to explode. You might not get injured, but you're probably not going to be that comfortable. And with being uncomfortable... Alright guys, so that was pretty wild. That's the third time actually in the past 10 days where a dog has charged at me while I'm running. And I wasn't running, I was filming a video here, but 2 other times in the past week or so, a dog's charged at me while running. I don't know what to do, guys. I don't want to hurt a dog, but I've gotten pretty close to needing to do something to defend myself against these dogs out here. It's a wild world. But that also gave me a chance to shower and to change, and now we're back out here. The birds are chirping more than ever. So let's pick up where we left off. I was talking about the New Balance SC Elite V4 and how mechanics are going to play a big role in picking the right shoe. And I was saying that if you are not landing right up on the forefoot, a shoe like the Alpha Fly might not make the most sense for you because the heel doesn't have a ton to land on. And if you actually look where the foam stops, it stops before the end of the heel. So if you are landing right on the back of the heel, if you're used to running in a high drop shoe like a Brooks Ghost that has a ton of foam back here, when you land on this, it's not going to give you the same support, and it feels like there's a braking force because there's not enough foam in the back hanging out past the heel. If you look at the New Balance SC Elite on the other hand, there is a ton of foam behind the heel. The heel stops here and we got almost an inch of foam behind that. So a shoe like this is going to make a lot more sense for runners who are heel strikers and whose mechanics are putting them closer to the back of the platform, which is the majority of marathon runners out there who are running 3+ hour marathons. Now, for a runner who is running a 2-hour marathon, they're going to be running at a higher fraction of their VO2 max. Or said in a different way, they're going to be running harder. And so if you run a 2-hour half marathon, you might be putting out the same effort for that half marathon over 13 miles that a different runner like an Eliud Kipchoge is putting out over a marathon. So that's why I say a shoe like the Alpha Fly might work if you're running a 2-hour marathon, but not for a 4-hour marathoner. And the pace that you're running those two things is the exact same, but the effort that you're gonna have to sustain over the marathon means that at the end of that 4 hours, you're probably not gonna be forefoot to midfoot striking. It's likely that your form breaks down. That's the reality of running a 3 to 4 hour race versus a 2-hour race, and you might not be running with the same strength up at the forefoot here. And so that's the key thing when we think about mechanics. Runners who are running 2:30 or faster marathons can likely run with strength for the entirety of that 26.2 miles because they are only running for 2 hours. Runners who are running 3 to 4 hours are running nearly double the time, and we can't run with the same strength and running form as faster runners. If you think about the way a sprinter runs, they are up on the balls of their feet the entire time. They wear much different footwear than marathoners. Us marathoners running 250 to 4-hour marathons, we aren't running like that, and we need more support in the heel to be comfortable over the race. And this was the point that I was picking up on when I got chased by that dog. Being comfortable is going to be a huge thing to having a good marathon race. Having comfortable footwear for the last hour if you're running a 4-hour marathon race, that could be the difference between having a PR and completely blowing up and needing to walk because a shoe like this was not supportive enough for you. And so beyond mechanics, the next big piece that influences how a shoe is going to work for you is body weight. Now, this is a very touchy subject, and I understand it can be triggering, and so if you have issues around this, there's a timestamp in the description below. If you don't want to hear me talk about body weight in the context of running, please use the timestamp and skip ahead to the next section. Now, for those of you who do want to listen to this, our body weight as runners is going to change how we can compress these foams. And so different foams are going to feel different and have a different effect on different runners based on weight. And so when I think about what this shoe was designed to do, this was designed for elite marathoners. Now, elite marathoners are usually under 130 pounds, maybe 140 pounds max, but the top ones for men, Eliud Kipchoge is 110 pounds. For women, the top marathoners can be 90 pounds. Desiree Linden, the American marathoner who won Boston a few years ago, I believe she's in the 90 pounds. Emily Sisson is another marathoner who has a custom designed New Balance shoe coming out this year, the New Balance SC Pacer V2. I believe she's 100 to 120 pounds. I'll look it up and flash it on the screen here. And so if we're thinking about this shoe designed for a 110-pound runner racing a 2-hour marathon, you can throw out pace altogether. Just thinking about the size, the amount of support that's engineered into a shoe like this, what the foam is designed to do, it is built to work for Kipchoge, his mechanics, elite runners' mechanics who compress the foam in a certain way. And so I would love to get some B-roll of this. I'm gonna do it when I get up into the office later today to show you how ZoomX compresses versus the New Balance Fuel Cell PIBA here, which is much more supportive. And so I talk about heavier runners a lot, and I know some people don't like when I use that phrase, but the reality is some of these race shoes were designed for 110-pound people. I'm 160 pounds, and so within that context, I am a heavier runner if I'm comparing myself to who these shoes were designed for. Now, if I stepped on an NBA basketball court at 6'2", I would be a tiny basketball player. So everything is relative, and that's the beautiful thing. We need to think about the relativity of all this. And so, yes, I'm a bigger runner, but I also am extremely healthy. My body weight is right in the middle. And so when I say heavier runner, that does not mean we're talking about BMI being an unhealthy range. It means some of these footwear that's designed for 100, 110-pound people might not work for you if you're 200, 220 pounds, or like me, if you're 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and run a certain way, not with the same exact mechanics as a runner who's 5'6" and 110 pounds and can forefoot strike for the entirety of a 2-hour race. And so when thinking about pace and body weight in these shoes, there are, of course, bigger runners who are not elite runners who can run 230 or faster marathons, but the reality is that most of us who are 150 pounds or more are not running 230 marathons. And so what might work for a 2-hour marathoner who is 110 pounds is not going to be the best shoe for a 180-pound marathoner who's running a 3-hour race. Something a little bit more supportive, a little bit firmer, which compresses differently and gives the right amount of energy return for that weight is going to be a better choice. And so with the ZoomX here, I can find it a little bit soft for my foot strike, and that's why I chose the Saucony Endorphin Pro 3 for the last marathon I did, the Charlotte 2022 marathon. It had a wider base, the foam felt a little bit more supportive for me. The Nike Vaporfly 2, which was the current Vaporfly version at the time, was narrower, and that ZoomX foam, it felt good when running fast for a half marathon, but it didn't feel like me at my size, I would get enough support for the entirety of the race. And so for me, the Pro 3 was the best choice for that marathon over the Vaporfly, which much faster runners with better mechanics, lighter weights, worked a little bit better for them. All right, guys, now the last piece that I wanted to talk about is time on feet. Now I touched on this a little bit in the mechanics section, but if you think about an elite marathoner, they're spending about 2 hours on their feet for that race versus many of us, we are spending 3 to 5 hours on our feet during the race. So we are all running 26.2 miles when we toe the line, and that's the awesome thing about this sport, right? You can compete in the same race, Chicago Marathon, London, Boston, as the top athletes in the world in this sport. I could not go on the field in the Super Bowl and start throwing passes to Kadarius Toney or Travis Kelce out there. So it's a really unique sport that we have. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the only reason we're having this conversation is because this is the only enthusiast sport where the top high-end gear packed with the most technology is really accessible to buy for everyone. And so we think $250, $285, $300, that is most certainly expensive. It's not cheap by any means. But if you compare that to other enthusiast sports like motorcycle racing or golf or rowing, barrier to entry to get the top level gear in that sport, it is thousands of dollars. And I have friends, even if you think about biking, right? Getting a high-end bike to do cycling road races, that can be $10, $20, $30,000, and you just keep pouring money into it. And so it's cool that we can buy these shoes, most of us, if we save up and budget for it, and it's not gonna be a complete life-changing investment that costs as much as college tuition. And so with that, that's the ethos of the sport, right? We compete on the same courses as the top runners in the world. Not all of us can go down to Augusta and play the same round of golf as those folks who are doing the Masters, but in the sport of running, we can do that. However, we are running a much different race at 3 hours, 4 hours, and 5 hours than a runner who's only spending 2 hours out there. And so if you think about what I referenced earlier, the VO2 max, the fraction of VO2 max. And so another way to think about it is relative effort. A marathon is gonna be hard for anybody, but an elite is able to run that race at maybe a 9 out of 10 of their max effort for the entirety of that 2 hours. Whereas the rest of us, we're running at maybe a 7 out of 10 for that 3 to 4 to 5 hours. Elites are able to hold a much higher heart rate, a much higher effort for a shorter period of time. And so if you think about what I was talking about earlier, for a lot of us, racing a fast half marathon at 2 hours, that's the same amount of effort that's going into a race as an elite who's racing a marathon in 2 hours. And so what's comfortable for an elite marathoner for 2 hours, or for anybody for 2 hours, like the Nike Alphafly could be a good 2 hour half marathon shoe, might not be comfortable for a 4 hour marathoner. And even the SC Elite V4 here, which is my prop for a more stable, forgiving, firmer shoe, even this might not be the best, most comfortable shoe for a 4 hour marathoner. Maybe the carbon fiber plate is going to do more harm than good because you're not able to run with the amount of power needed to really get the benefit from that plate toward the end of that race. Now, there has been research that has shown that some carbon fiber plated marathon shoes can improve running economy for runners who are not elite athletes. So that's saying you can use an SC Elite V4 or an Alphafly. It depends if it works for your mechanics, and you'll still be a little bit faster. But when we're thinking about the marathon specifically and running 3 to 5 hours in that race, it's going to be a little bit less about running economy and a little bit more about comfort toward the end of that race. And so what's comfortable for the 2 hours, probably not going to be comfortable for 4 hours. And that's why a shoe like maybe the Puma Deviate Nitro 2, which I decided to bring out here after my run this morning, that's why something like this might be a better option for a 4 hour marathon pace. Maybe this is not the exact best shoe, but something that's not as aggressive of a geometry. It's a little bit more forgiving. It doesn't feel as harsh with the plate, and it doesn't feel like you have to roll through your stride aggressively to get the benefit from the shoe. And so if we think about the Alphafly specifically here, you're not going to be able to run comfortably in this shoe for 4 hours because you need to be landing up here to really make this shoe work. New Balance SC Elite, you might be able to do that. It has a more gentle sloping rocker. Shout out to my guy Curiosities, who's the first one who I heard mention this, and it has more support back here. Another option for a 4 hour marathon, I'm gonna bring this out here, is the Tier Valkyrie Elite Carbon. Shout out to Tier, by the way. They did send me the shoe, and then I loved it so much that I set up a meeting with them, and I was like, dude, we gotta spread the word. So I got a discount code, 10% off of this. They also sent me some swag, so I guess I am biased to Tier now. I think this is a superior product to a lot of shoes on the market for bigger runners who need a little bit more stability and support. But if you look at the geometry of this, it's much flatter, so when you're landing on the back and heel striking, you get more comfort, and you're gonna get more comfort in the later stages of that marathon than something like this, which has a super weird geometry and it has no foam out in the back, so that when you're landing back here, it's not the most comfortable experience. And so that's why pace is important. It has nothing to do with the actual speed that you're running, and everything to do with how long you're going to be out there for the marathon, how much power you're putting down into the shoe, which is coming from your body weight, and where you're landing on the shoe, which has everything to do with your mechanics. And pace is underneath all of that. Pace is the thing that ties it together, and it's an easy heuristic or shortcut to tell us how a runner is running. We can assume based on somebody's marathon time, if they tell us they're running a 2:30 marathon, we can assume where their heart rate's gonna be. We can assume how they're gonna be running, not necessarily their foot strike, but how they retain their form. If they're running a 2:30 marathon, they're likely retaining their form for most of that race, versus a 5 hour marathoner might not be running the entirety of the marathon. They might be walking. They definitely are gonna need some more support out in the heel and something that's more comfortable. Unlike the Alphafly, this is not a shoe you'd wanna use if you're walking the marathon. And there are heavier runners who are are not elites, who are running sub 2:30 marathons. And for those runners, a shoe like the Vaporfly or the Alphafly might make sense, but there are also a lot of great alternatives out there that are a little bit more structured and supportive, like the New Balance SC Elite V4, that Tier Valkyrie Elite, for bigger runners who find that ZoomX foam and other soft race day foams a little bit too compressive, a little bit too squishy when running fast. And that's why there's no best marathon shoe for everyone. There's gonna be a different shoe that works for different people. And if you are running a 4:30 marathon, if you're running a 4-hour marathon, if you're running an 8-minute pace for your marathon, Alphafly probably not going to be the best shoe for you. If you're running an 8-minute pace for a 5K or a half marathon, maybe this is a good shoe for you if you are a 4-foot striker. So I want to close today with a framework that I've learned recently that is super relevant here, and that is the difference between equity and equality. And so equality means making things equal for everybody. Let's give Eliud Kipchoge the Alphafly, and I'll also get the Alphafly, and every runner out there will get the Alphafly to run 26.2 miles. Now, Eliud Kipchoge is going to be finishing that marathon in 2 hours and 10 minutes or to 2 hours, much faster than I'm going to be finishing it, but we're both running 26.2 miles, so we get equal gear. Equity means, hey, Eliud Kipchoge is running that 26.2 miles in 2 hours. I'm gonna be running it in probably closer to 3 hours, so maybe we need different footwear. Even though we're running the same exact race, the time that it's gonna take us to finish it requires different tools, and so leveling the playing field, giving us both our best chance at getting our best time is going to require two different shoes. And so I might choose the New Balance SC Elite V4 here. I'm more of a heel striker. I'm going to be putting a little bit more weight down into the shoe for a much longer period of time. I need more support. Eliud Kipchoge can rip, rock, and roll with the 4-foot striking technology embedded here in the Alphafly 3. All right, guys, I hope this was a helpful video for some of you out there picking your next race day shoe. I am going to be reviewing hopefully every single race day shoe on the market this year. If there is one that I have not covered yet that you want to see covered on the channel, yes, we're gonna have the Saucony Endorphin Pro 4 coming. I'm not too excited to run in that based on my experience in the Speed 4, but if you have any other requests, please let me know and I will answer all your questions in the comments below. As always, I appreciate you watching and I'll be back tomorrow with another video.